Sometimes the biggest moments in life come from the smallest choices. On a rainy Chicago evening, 12-year-old Marcus Thompson faced such a choice. Walking home from basketball practice, he spotted a stranded luxury car with a flat tire. Most kids would have hurried past, eager to get out of the storm. But Marcus wasn't most kids. His uncle had taught him about cars, about responsibility, about helping others in need. He had no way of knowing that the tall man standing beside that car was Michael Jordan himself. He had no way of knowing that this simple act of kindness would open doors he never knew existed. And he definitely had no way of knowing that this chance encounter would change not just his life, but the lives of countless others. The basketball thudded against the cracked concrete, each bounce echoing off the brick walls of the empty court. Marcus Thompson had been there since school let out, just like every other day. The metal chain nets clinked as another shot sailed through, his 15th in a row. "That's what I'm talking about," he whispered to himself, wiping sweat from his forehead with the sleeve of his worn Chicago Bulls t-shirt. The shirt had once been black, but now it was more of a faded gray, handed down from his cousin Jerome 2 birthdays ago. The sky above was turning the color of bruised plums, and dark clouds were rolling in from Lake Michigan. Marcus knew he should head home, but he couldn't resist setting up for one more shot. His mother always said he was stubborn that way, just like his father had been. The 12-year-old dribbled 3 times, his lucky number, took 2 steps back, and launched the ball toward the hoop. The orange sphere hung in the air for what felt like forever before dropping straight through the net without touching the rim. "Swish!" he said with a grin, but the victory was short-lived as the first fat raindrop landed on his nose. Marcus grabbed his backpack from the sideline and tucked the basketball under his arm. It was his most prized possession, a gift from his Uncle James before he passed away last year. The walk home from Morris Park Courts wasn't long, maybe 20 minutes if he hurried, but the weather was making it feel like it might take twice that today. The streets of Southside Chicago were quieter than usual, with most people already inside, avoiding the coming storm. Marcus pulled his Bulls cap lower over his eyes as the rain started falling harder. The cap was the real deal, not one of those knockoffs they sold at the corner store. He'd saved up for 3 months, doing extra chores for Ms. Rodriguez next door and helping Mr. Wilson organize his garage on weekends. Thunder rumbled overhead as he passed Pete's corner store, where the neon open sign flickered weakly in the growing darkness. Through the window, he could see Mr. Pete restocking the candy shelves. The old man waved, and Marcus waved back. He'd been coming to this store since he was little, back when his dad would buy him Skittles after his Saturday morning basketball practice. The memory made his chest tight, the way it always did when he thought about his father. 3 years had passed since the accident, but sometimes it felt like yesterday. His mom said time was supposed to make it easier, but Marcus wasn't sure about that yet. A gust of wind sent newspaper pages tumbling across the street like urban tumbleweeds. Marcus pulled his thin jacket tighter around his shoulders, wishing he'd listened to his mom about bringing the heavier one. But it had been sunny this morning, and the jacket made it harder to shoot properly. As he turned onto Oakwood Boulevard, the rain really started coming down. Marcus picked up his pace, his worn sneakers splashing through puddles that were getting deeper by the minute. The basketball under his arm was getting slippery, so he stuffed it into his backpack, not caring that it would crush his homework papers. He could smooth them out later. Lightning flashed, illuminating the row of brick buildings that lined the street. Some windows glowed warmly, while others were dark or boarded up. Marcus knew every building, every crack in the sidewalk, every tree trying to grow through the concrete. This was his neighborhood, for better or worse. He was thinking about the leftover spaghetti his mom had promised would be waiting for him when he heard it. A loud pop, followed by a distinctive hissing sound. The noise came from around the corner, where Oakwood met Martin Luther King Drive. Marcus slowed his steps. His mom always told him to mind his own business, especially when it was getting dark. But something about that sound was familiar. He'd heard it before, working with Uncle James in his garage. Another flash of lightning revealed a sleek black car pulled over to the curb, its right rear tire completely flat. Someone was standing next to it, a tall figure partially hidden under an expensive-looking umbrella. The man was looking down at his phone, shaking his head. Marcus hesitated. The smart thing would be to keep walking. Get home before the storm got worse. Stay dry. Stay safe. But Uncle James's voice echoed in his head. Sometimes the right thing and the smart thing ain't the same thing, nephew. Besides, this wasn't some sketchy alley. This was Martin Luther King Drive, well lit even in the storm, with plenty of people around. Marcus could see families in their windows, watching TV or sitting down to dinner. The neon signs from Harold CT2 Chicken Shack cast a red and yellow glow over the wet sidewalk. He took a deep breath and walked closer to the stranded car. As he approached, he could see it wasn't just any car. It was the kind of car he'd only seen in magazines or on TV. The rain ran in streams over its glossy paint. And even with a flat tire, it looked like it could outrun anything else on the road. The tall man was still focused on his phone, probably trying to call for help. He hadn't noticed Marcus yet. Marcus cleared his throat. "Excuse me, sir? Do you need some help with that tire?" The man turned, and Marcus felt his heart skip a beat. There was something familiar about him, something he couldn't quite place. In the dim light and rain, the man's features were hard to make out, but Marcus could tell he was African American, well-dressed, and very, very tall. "You know something about changing tires, young man?" the stranger asked, his voice deep and confident despite the situation. Marcus nodded, rain dripping from the brim of his bull's cap. "Yes, sir. My uncle taught me. He was a mechanic before." He swallowed hard. "Before he passed away last year." The man studied Marcus for a moment, then gestured to the flat tire. "Well, I could use a hand if you're offering. I've got a spare in the trunk, but I'll be honest, I'm better with a basketball than a lug wrench." Something about the way he said basketball made Marcus look more closely at the man's face. But another crack of thunder made him jump slightly, breaking his concentration. "I can help," Marcus said, setting his backpack carefully against the building wall where it would stay dry under the awning. "Uncle James taught me everything about cars. He said everyone should know how to handle an emergency." As Marcus moved toward the trunk, the rain pounding on the pavement around them, he had no way of knowing that this moment, this simple decision to help a stranded motorist, would be the beginning of something much bigger than a flat tire on a stormy Chicago evening. The stranger pressed a button on his key fob, and the trunk opened with a soft click. Inside, everything was spotless and organized, with the spare tire and tools arranged perfectly. Marcus reached for the lug wrench, its metal cold against his palm. "First thing we need to do," Marcus said, his voice growing more confident as he recalled his uncle's lessons, "is make sure the car won't roll while we're working on it." The tall man nodded approvingly. "Smart thinking. Sounds like your uncle taught you well." As Marcus began walking the man through the process, he couldn't shake the feeling that this chance encounter was something special. Maybe it was the way the stranger listened so intently to his instructions, or how he kept glancing at Marcus's bull's cap with what looked like amusement. Or maybe it was just the strange magic of this rainy evening, where everything familiar seemed somehow different. Whatever it was, Marcus knew one thing for certain. This wasn't going to be like any other walk home he'd ever had. The rain drummed steadily on the car's hood as Marcus positioned the jack under the frame. His hands moved with practiced confidence, muscle memory taking over as his mind drifted back to afternoons spent in Uncle James's garage. "Remember, nephew," his uncle's voice echoed in his head. "Every car's got its sweet spot for the jack. Put it in the wrong place, and you might damage more than just the tire." Marcus's fingers found the right spot almost immediately, a small notch beneath the car's sleek body that was made exactly for this purpose. The stranger watched with interest, holding his umbrella over both of them now. "Your uncle taught you well," the man said, and something in his voice made Marcus look up. In the glow of the street lights, there was a familiar curve to the man's smile, like something Marcus had seen 100 times before. But where? "He was the best mechanic in South Side," Marcus replied, cranking the jack handle. The car began to rise slowly off the wet pavement. "He could fix anything with wheels." Thunder rolled overhead, but it wasn't as loud now. The storm was moving east, toward the lake, though the rain kept falling in a steady curtain around them. The red neon from Harold's chicken shack reflected off the puddles, making them look like pools of liquid fire. "Tell me about him," the stranger said, crouching down beside Marcus. He was wearing expensive-looking pants, but he didn't seem to care that they were getting wet. Marcus loosened the first lug nut, just like Uncle James had taught him. Not all the way off. That would come later. "He had this garage over on 47th Street, Marcus said, moving to the next nut. "People would bring him cars that other mechanics had given up on. He'd stay up all night sometimes, trying to figure them out. Every car's got a story," Uncle James used to say. "You just gotta be patient enough to listen to it." The stranger nodded, as if he understood exactly what Marcus meant. "Sounds like a man who loved his work." He did. Marcus moved to the third lug nut. "He was teaching me everything he knew. Said I had a natural talent for it." He swallowed, hard, focusing on the task at hand. Then last year, his heart, it just stopped. The doctor said there was nothing anyone could have done. The man was quiet for a moment, letting Marcus work. The only sounds were the rain, the distant thunder, and the metallic squeak of the lug nuts as Marcus loosened them one by one. "Loss is hard," the man finally said, his deep voice gentle, "especially when it's someone who believed in you." Marcus nodded, not trusting himself to speak. He finished loosening the last lug nut and stood up, wiping his hands on his jeans. They were soaked anyway. A little grease wouldn't make much difference. "Now comes the tricky part," he said, his voice steadier. "We need to get the flat tire off and put the spare on. The spare's usually lighter, but we have to line up the holes just right." As Marcus spoke, a car drove past, its headlights sweeping across them. For just a second, the light illuminated the stranger's face clearly, and Marcus felt his heart skip a beat. There was something so familiar about those eyes, that jawline. But before he could place it, the moment passed, and they were back. In the neon-tinted darkness of the storm, Marcus pushed the thought aside and focused on removing the lug nuts completely, placing each one carefully in the hubcap so they wouldn't roll away. Uncle James had taught him that trick after spending 20 minutes searching for a lost nut in his garage. Organization is key, nephew. A missing lug nut might not seem like much, but it could be the difference between getting home safe and being stranded. The flat tire was heavy, but Marcus managed to pull it off without too much trouble. The stranger moved to help, but Marcus shook his head. "I got it, sir. You just keep that umbrella steady." As Marcus rolled the flat tire toward the trunk, he noticed something else about the car. A small decal in the back window. It was partially obscured by raindrops, but he could make out what looked like a jumping figure. "The spare's in for you. Good condition, the man said, interrupting Marcus's thoughts. Brand new, actually. Never thought I'd need it, but my mother always said better safe than sorry. Marcus smiled, thinking of his own mother. She was probably worried sick by now. He was usually home before dark, but she'd understand when he told her about helping someone in need. She was always telling him to look out for others, just like his father had done. My mom says the same thing, Marcus replied, rolling the spare tire into position. She makes me carry an umbrella even when the weather report says sunny. The man laughed, a rich, warm sound that seemed to cut through the gloom of the evening. Sounds like a wise woman. Mothers usually are. Marcus lined up the spare tire with practiced precision. Uncle James had made him practice this part over and over, until he could do it blindfolded. It's all about feel, he'd said. Listen to what the car's telling you. As he worked, Marcus found himself telling the stranger more about Uncle James, about the lessons he'd learned in that old garage. He talked about the first tire he'd changed by himself, about the pride in his uncle's eyes when he'd done it perfectly. The man listened intently, asking questions that showed he was really interested, not just being polite. There was something about him that made Marcus feel comfortable, like talking to an old friend instead of a stranger he'd just met in the rain. With the spare tire secured, Marcus began tightening the lug nuts. Not too tight, he muttered to himself, remembering Uncle James's warning. Cross pattern, even pressure. Cross pattern, the man asked. Yeah, Marcus said, demonstrating. You don't do them one after another in a circle. You go across, like a star. That way the pressure's even all around. Uncle James said if you do it in a circle, the tire might not be on straight. The man nodded, appreciatively. That's the kind of detail that separates the pros from the amateurs. Marcus felt a warmth in his chest at the compliment. He finished tightening the last nut and stood up, surveying his work. Even in the dim light, he could tell. The spare was mounted perfectly. Almost done, he said, reaching for the jack handle. Just need to lower it back down and give the nuts one final check. As the car settled back onto the pavement, another car drove past, its headlights illuminating them once again. This time, Marcus caught a better look at the stranger's face, and something clicked in his mind. The height, the voice, the way he carried himself. Could it be? His hands froze on the lug wrench as his mind raced. The expensive car, the jumping figure decal, that familiar smile. The man must have noticed Marcus's sudden stillness because he tilted his head slightly, that famous smile playing at the corners of his mouth. Something on your mind, young man? Marcus opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. He looked down at his bull's cap, then back at the man, then at the car with its custom plates that he hadn't paid attention to before. How had he not realized sooner? The stranger's smile widened, and in that moment, there was no doubt left in Marcus's mind. He was standing in the rain on Martin Luther King Drive, having just changed a tire for the greatest basketball player who ever lived. Before Marcus could find his voice, a flash of lightning illuminated the street, followed almost immediately by a deafening crack of thunder. The storm wasn't moving away after all. It was circling back, and the worst was yet to come. But somehow, Marcus knew that the approaching storm was the least remarkable thing about this extraordinary evening. As he stared up at the legendary figure before him, he had no way of knowing that changing this tire was just the beginning, that this chance encounter in the rain would set in motion a series of events that would change his life forever. All he knew was that this moment, standing in the rain with his childhood hero, felt like the kind of thing that only happened in dreams. But the cold rain on his face and the grease on his hands told him this was very, very real. And somewhere, he was sure, Uncle James was smiling. You're Michael Jordan," Marcus finally managed to say, his voice barely a whisper above the rain. The man's smile grew wider. "And you're a young man who knows his way around a car better than I ever did at your age." He extended his hand. "Thank you for the help, Marcus." Marcus stared at the offered hand for a moment before reaching out to shake it. His own hand was still slightly greasy from the tire change, but Mr. Jordan didn't seem to mind. "I've watched all your games," Marcus blurted out, then immediately felt his face grow hot despite the cool rain. "I mean, the ones I could find on YouTube. The flu game, the last shot against Utah, the 63 points against Boston." Jordan chuckled, a warm sound that somehow made Marcus feel less nervous. "Sounds like you know your basketball history, too. But right now, I'm more impressed with your mechanical skills. Where did you say your uncle's garage was?" "On 47th Street, Marcus replied, still trying to process that this was really happening. J&T Auto Repair. The T was for Thompson. That was our last name. Uncle James always said he'd teach me everything he knew so I could take over someday." Another flash of lightning lit up the sky, followed by a rumble of thunder that seemed to shake the very ground. Jordan looked up at the darkening clouds, then back at Marcus. "Listen," he said, "it's getting worse out here. Let me give you a ride home. It's the least I can do after you helped me out." Marcus's heart skipped a beat. A ride home. In Michael Jordan's car. But then he remembered his backpack with the basketball inside, still sitting against the building wall. "I've got my stuff," he started to say, but Jordan was already walking over to retrieve it. "Nice ball," Jordan said, noting the basketball partially visible in the open backpack. "You play?" Marcus nodded, following Jordan to the passenger side of the car. "Every day after school at Morris Park Courts. I'm trying out for the school team next week." The interior of the car was even nicer than the outside. The leather seats were soft and warm, and despite being soaking wet, Marcus felt immediately comfortable. Jordan placed the backpack carefully in the back seat before sliding into the driver's side. "Morris Park," Jordan mused, starting the engine. "I know those courts. Tough neighborhood, but good basketball. Which way to your house?" "Left at the UEU. Next light," Marcus directed, still hardly believing this was real. "Then 3 blocks down." As they drove through the rain-slicked streets, Jordan asked Marcus about his game. Not just casual questions, but specific ones about his shooting form, his defensive stance, his practice routine. Marcus answered eagerly, soaking up every word of advice like a sponge. "The key is repetition," Jordan was saying as they turned onto Marcus's street. "Same motion, same release point, every single time. That's how you build muscle memory. Your body needs to know what to do before your mind has time to think about it." Marcus nodded. "That's what Uncle James used to say about cars. He said your hands need to learn the tools so well that they become like extensions of your fingers." "Smart. Man, your uncle," Jordan replied, pulling up in front of Marcus's apartment building. The rain had finally started to ease, though the sky remained dark with clouds. "Sounds like he taught you about more than just cars." Marcus looked down at his hands, still slightly stained with grease. "Yeah, he did. He always said that whatever you do it with your whole heart. Whether it's fixing cars or playing basketball or..." His voice trailed off as he thought about his uncle. Jordan was quiet for a moment, studying Marcus with those intense eyes that had stared down so many opponents on the court. "Your uncle was right, and from what I've seen tonight, you take his lessons seriously." Marcus felt a surge of pride at the compliment. Coming from Michael Jordan, it meant more than any trophy or medal ever could. "Can I ask you something, Mr. Jordan?" Marcus said, gathering his courage. "Of course. How do you keep going when you lose someone who believed in you? Someone who was teaching you everything they knew?" The question hung in the air. Between them, accompanied only by the soft patter of rain on the car's roof. Jordan seemed to consider his words carefully before responding. "You honor them," he said finally. "You take everything they taught you, everything they believed about you, and you make it part of who you are." "My father." He paused, and Marcus remembered that Michael Jordan had also lost someone close to him. "My father believed in me before anyone else did. So every time I step on a court, every award I've won, every goal I've achieved, it's all been a way of proving him right." Marcus felt tears prickling at the corners of his eyes, but he blinked them back. "That's what I want to do for Uncle James. Make him proud, you know." Jordan reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small leather case. From it, he removed a business card and a pen. He wrote something on the back of the card before handing it to Marcus. "I think you're already making him proud," Jordan said. "But if you'd like some help along the way, that's my personal number on the back. Call it tomorrow afternoon. I might have an opportunity for you." Marcus took the card with trembling fingers, reading the number written in Jordan's distinctive handwriting. "Thank you, Mr. Jordan, for everything." "No, thank you, Marcus, for reminding me that sometimes the biggest moments come from the smallest acts of kindness." He gestured to the building. "You better get inside before your mother starts to worry. And Marcus?" "Yes, sir?" "About those school tryouts next week, remember what I said about repetition. Same motion, same release point, every time." Marcus nodded, gathering his backpack from the rear seat. As he stepped out into the now gentle rain, he turned back one last time. "Mr. Jordan? Yes? Uncle James would have loved meeting you." Jordan smiled that famous smile one more time. "Something tells me he's proud of you right now, Marcus. Very proud." Marcus watched as the car pulled away, its taillights glowing red. In the misty evening, the business card felt warm in his hand, like it was charged with some kind of special energy. Looking up at his apartment window, he could see the lights were on. His mom was probably watching TV, waiting for him to come home. What would she say when he told her about this evening? Would she even believe him? But then he looked at the card in his hand, at the number written on the back, and he knew that everything that had happened was real. As he climbed the stairs to his apartment, Marcus couldn't help but wonder what opportunity Michael Jordan had in mind for him. But somehow, he knew that whatever it was, his life was about to change in ways he couldn't even imagine. Behind him, the storm finally began to clear, and through a break in the clouds, the first stars of the evening began to shine. Marcus stood outside his apartment door, his hand hovering over the knob. His clothes were still damp, and the business card in his pocket felt like it weighed 100 pounds. How could he even begin to explain this evening to his mom? Taking a deep breath, he turned the key and stepped inside. The small apartment smelled like spaghetti sauce and fabric softener, the familiar sense of home that usually made him feel instantly better. Tonight, though, his stomach was doing backflips. "Marcus, that you, baby?" His mother's voice came from the kitchen, where he could hear the soft clinking of dishes being washed. "Yeah, Mom. Sorry I'm late." He dropped his backpack by the door, careful not to let it fall too hard and damage the basketball inside. Lisa Thompson appeared in the kitchen doorway, drying her hands on a dish towel. She was still wearing her hospital scrubs from her shift at the medical center, her hair pulled back in a neat bun. One look at her son's face, and her expression shifted from mild concern to intense curiosity. "What happened?" she asked, moving closer. "You look like you've seen a ghost?" Marcus let out a small laugh. "Not a ghost, Mom, but you're not going to believe who I met today." He told her everything about the flat tire, about using Uncle James's lessons to help, about realizing who the driver was. As he spoke, they moved to their small living room, sitting on the worn but comfortable couch that had been in their family for as long as Marcus could remember. When he pulled out the business card, his mother's eyes widened. She took it carefully, as if it might disappear if she handled it too roughly. "Michael Jordan," she whispered, reading the name. Then she turned it over, seeing the handwritten number. "And this is really his—" Marcus nodded. "He said to call tomorrow afternoon. Said something about an opportunity." His mother was quiet for a moment, studying the card. Marcus knew that. Look, she was thinking hard about something, the same expression she wore when reviewing medical charts at work. "You know," she said finally, "your father would have loved this story. He used to tell me how he'd wait outside Chicago Stadium for hours just to catch a glimpse of Jordan arriving for games." "Really?" Marcus leaned forward. His mom didn't often talk about his dad, and he soaked up every detail when she did. She smiled, lost in the memory. "Oh yes. He'd come home freezing cold but so excited if he'd managed to get Jordan to wave at him. And now, here you are, changing his tire in the rain." "Like Uncle James taught me," Marcus added softly. "Like Uncle James taught you," she agreed, pulling him into a hug. "Those two would be so proud of you, baby. Not because you met Michael Jordan, but because you stopped to help someone in need. That's who they raised you to be." Marcus hugged her back, breathing in the familiar scent of her coconut shampoo mixed with hospital antiseptic. "Do you think I should call the number tomorrow?" She pulled back, holding him at arm's length. "Of course you should. But first, you need to eat something and get some sleep. You've got school tomorrow, and those tryouts are coming up fast." Later, that night, lying in bed, Marcus couldn't sleep. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Jordan's smile, heard his voice giving basketball advice. The business card was on his bedside table, propped against his lamp where he could see it, proving this wasn't all just a dream. Morning came too quickly, and not quickly enough. Marcus was already awake when his alarm went off, having barely slept. He got dressed in record time, pulling on his favorite jeans and a clean Bulls t-shirt. Not the faded one from yesterday. "Eat your breakfast," his mom reminded him as he fidgeted at the kitchen table. "That oatmeal isn't going to feed you by osmosis." "Did you tell anyone?" he asked, forcing himself to take a bite. "About last night?" She shook her head. "That's your story to tell, baby. But remember, sometimes the best stories are the ones we hold close for a while. Let them sink in before we share them." Marcus nodded, understanding what she meant. It felt special, having this secret between just them for now. The walk to school was different than usual. Everything looked the same buildings, the same cracked sidewalks, the same corner store where Mr. Pete was already restocking his shelves. But Marcus felt different, like something fundamental had shifted inside him. At his locker, his best friend Dion appeared, wearing their school's basketball practice jersey. "Yo, where were you last night?" Dion asked. "We had a pickup game at Morris Park. Tony finally landed that three-pointer he's been practicing." Marcus opened his mouth, then closed it, remembering his mother's words about holding some stories close. "Got caught in the rain," he said instead. "Had to help someone with their car." Man, you and your car knowledge. Dion laughed. You're gonna end up a mechanic instead of an NBA star. Maybe I can be both, Marcus replied, thinking about how Jordan had been just as impressed with his tire-changing skills as with his basketball knowledge. The school day crawled by. In math class, Marcus caught himself doodling basketball plays in his notebook instead of solving equations. In English, they were reading The Outsiders, and for once, Marcus really connected with the idea that things aren't always what they seem on the surface. During lunch, he sat with Dion and their usual group, half listening to their chatter about the upcoming basketball tryouts. His hand kept drifting to his pocket, where the business card was safely tucked away. Earth to Marcus, Dion waved a hand in front of his face. You good, bro? You've been spacing out all day. Yeah, just thinking about the tryouts, Marcus said. It wasn't entirely a lie. He was thinking about Jordan's advice about repetition and muscle memory. The final bell couldn't come soon enough. As students poured out of the building, Marcus hung back, telling Dion he had something to take care of before heading to the courts. Finding a quiet corner in the school courtyard, he pulled out the business card. The afternoon sun made the embossed letters gleam. His hands were shaking slightly as he took out his phone, his mom's old one, passed down when she upgraded last year. Before he could dial, though, a shadow fell across him. Looking up, Marcus saw a tall man in a suit standing there, his shoes polished to a mirror shine. Marcus Thompson? The man asked, his voice professional but friendly. Marcus nodded slowly, the business card still in his hand. Mr. Jordan sent me, the man said with a smile. He thought you might appreciate a ride to where we're going. Behind the man, parked at the school curb, was a sleek black car. Different from Jordan's, but just as impressive. And just like that, Marcus knew that his mother had been right. His life was changing, right here, right now. The only question was, how much? Marcus stared at the black car, then back at the man in the suit. His first thought wasn't about where they might be going, but about his mom. She'd taught him never to go anywhere with strangers, no matter how official they looked. I should call my mother first, Marcus said, gripping his phone tighter. She works at Southside Medical Center. The man's smile widened, and he nodded approvingly. Of course. Mr. Jordan mentioned you were thoughtful like that. In fact, he reached into his jacket and pulled out a business card of his own. I'm David Richardson, Mr. Jordan's personal assistant. Why don't you call your mother right now? I'll speak with her myself. Marcus dialed his mom's number, watching Mr. Richardson carefully. After 2 rings, she picked up. Baby? Everything okay? Mom, there's someone here from Mr. Jordan. His name is Mr. Richardson, and he wants to take me somewhere. Can I put him on? There was a pause on the other end of the line. Put him on. Marcus handed the phone to Mr. Richardson, who spoke professionally but warmly to his mother. He explained that Mr. Jordan had arranged something special and wanted to surprise Marcus, but absolutely understood the need for parental permission. He gave her his credentials, offered to text her his ID, and assured her Marcus would be back home by dinner time. After what felt like forever, Mr. Richardson handed the phone back to Marcus. Mom? It's okay, baby, she said, though he could hear the mix of excitement and concern in her voice. Mr. Richardson checked out, but you keep your phone on and call me if you need anything. I mean, anything. Yes, ma'am. And Marcus, remember what we talked about last night? About holding some stories close? I remember. Good. Now go, and tell me everything when you get home. After hanging up, Marcus followed Mr. Richardson to the car. A uniformed driver opened the back door for them, and Marcus slid onto leather seats even nicer than the ones in Jordan's car. The windows were tinted dark, and there was a small refrigerator built into the center console. "Water?" Mr. Richardson offered, opening the fridge to reveal rows of bottles. Marcus shook his head. His stomach was doing too many flips to drink. Anything. As they pulled away from the school, Marcus saw Dion walking toward the basketball courts. His friend did a double take at the sight of Marcus in the fancy car, but Marcus could only wave as they drove past. "Mr. Jordan was very impressed with you last night," Mr. Richardson said, as they merged onto Lake Shore Drive. The afternoon sun sparkled on Lake Michigan to their right. "Not just your mechanical skills, but your character. He said you reminded him of himself at your age." Marcus's heart skipped a beat. "He said that?" "Indeed. He mentioned how you talked about your uncle, your dedication to practice, your understanding of the game. It's rare to find someone your age with such focus." They drove north along the lake, passing gleaming high-rises and carefully manicured parks. Marcus had rarely been to this part of the city. It felt like a different world from his South Side neighborhood. "Can you tell me where we're going?" he asked. "Almost there," Mr. Richardson replied with a smile. "But first, tell me, what do you want to be when you grow up?" The question caught Marcus off guard. Last week, he would have said NBA player without hesitation. But after last night, after thinking about Uncle James and everything he'd taught, him, "I want to help people," he said finally. "Maybe fix cars like my uncle, or play basketball, or I don't know. Just make a difference somehow." Mr. Richardson nodded, as if Marcus had passed some kind of test. Making a difference. That's exactly what Mr. Jordan had in mind. The car turned off Lake Shore Drive and pulled up to a massive building Marcus recognized from TV, the United Center, home of the Chicago Bulls. His heart started racing as they drove past the main entrance to a private parking area. "Come with me," Mr. Richardson said as they got out of the car. They entered through a side door, where a security guard nodded to them without asking for ID. The hallways were wide and clean, with framed photos of Bulls legends lining the walls. Marcus saw pictures of Scottie Pippen, Dennis Rodman, and, of course, Michael Jordan. After passing through several corridors, they reached a set of double doors. Mr. Richardson paused with his hand on the handle. "Ready?" Marcus nodded, though his legs felt like jelly. The doors opened to reveal a fully lit basketball court, the actual Bulls practice court. And there, standing at the free throw line with a basketball in his hands, was Michael Jordan himself. "Welcome to my office, Marcus," Jordan said, dribbling the ball slowly. "Catch." He passed the ball to Marcus, who caught it instinctively. The leather felt warm and slightly worn, perfect for gripping. "Show me what you've got," Jordan said, gesturing to the hoop. "Just like you do at Morris Park courts." Marcus looked down at his school clothes. Jeans and sneakers weren't exactly basketball attire. But then he remembered what Jordan had said about muscle memory. Same motion, same release point, every time. He dribbled twice, set his feet, and shot. The ball arced through the air and swished through the net without touching the rim. Jordan nodded approvingly. "Uncle James taught you about cars. Who taught you that sweet jump shot?" "My dad," Marcus said quietly. "Before he passed, he'd take me to the park every Saturday morning. Said the early bird gets the best rebounds." "Smart man." Jordan retrieved the ball and passed it back. "Your mother told Mr. Richardson you've got basketball tryouts coming up?" Marcus caught the ball, surprised. "Yes, sir. Next week." "Well, I might have an idea about that. See, I've been thinking about starting a youth program. Something to give kids from the South Side a real chance, not just at basketball, but at life." Mentoring, education, mechanical training, the works. Marcus's hands tightened on the ball. Like what Uncle James did for me? Exactly. Jordan walked closer, his presence both intimidating and somehow comforting. But I need someone to help me design it. Someone who understands both worlds, basketball and mechanics. Someone who knows what it's like to learn from people who believe in you. Marcus felt his throat tighten. You want my help? I want your insight, your experience, and in return, I want to offer you something. Jordan gestured to Mr. Richardson, who opened a leather portfolio he'd been carrying. Full basketball training with professional coaches, Mr. Richardson began. Private tutoring to keep your grades strong. And, he paused, looking at Marcus significantly, apprenticeship with a master mechanic who worked with your uncle years. AGO. All while helping us create a program that could help hundreds of kids like yourself. Marcus felt dizzy. It was too much. Too perfect. But why me? Jordan took the ball from Marcus's hands and spun it on his finger. That familiar move Marcus had seen countless times on TV. Because last night, when you saw someone in need, you didn't hesitate. You didn't know it was me. You just wanted to help. That's rare, Marcus. That's special. Marcus thought about what his mother had said, about how his father and uncle James would be proud not because he met Michael Jordan, but because he stopped to help. There's just one catch, Jordan continued, catching the ball and holding it. This has to stay quiet for now. No social media, no telling friends, just family. Think you can handle that? Marcus thought about Dion, about how hard it would be to keep this secret. But then he remembered his mother's words about holding some stories close. Yes, sir, I can handle it. Jordan smiled that famous smile. I thought you might say that. Now? He passed the ball back to Marcus one more time. Show me that jump shot again. This time, imagine the whole world is watching. As Marcus set, up for another shot, he felt something he hadn't felt since Uncle James passed away. That sense of being exactly where he was meant to be, learning from someone who saw something special in him. The ball left his hands, spinning perfectly through, the air toward the hoop. In that moment, suspended between release and result, Marcus knew that this was more than just an opportunity. It was a chance to make his father, his uncle, and now Michael Jordan proud. The ball swished through the net, and the sound echoed through the empty arena like applause. 3 months passed like a fast break down the court. Summer was fading into fall, and Marcus's life had transformed in ways he still couldn't quite believe. Every Monday and Wednesday after school, Mr. Richardson's black car would pick him up, not from the front of the school where everyone could see, but from the quiet side street behind the cafeteria. Marcus would slide into the leather seats, his gym bag packed with both basketball shoes and work gloves, ready for whatever that day might bring. Today was a Wednesday, and Marcus sat in his usual spot, watching the familiar route to the United Center. He'd grown comfortable with these rides, though he never took them for granted. His mother had taught him that. Good session at the garage yesterday? Mr. Richardson asked from the front seat. He always rode along, keeping track of Marcus's progress in a leather-bound notebook. Yes, sir, Marcus replied, thinking about the transmission he'd helped rebuild under Mr. Washington's watchful eye. The old mechanic had worked with Uncle James years ago and sometimes told stories about their younger days while teaching Marcus the finer points of auto repair. Your mother mentioned your grades came in, Mr. Richardson continued. All A's and B's? Marcus nodded, pride warming his chest. The tutor Jordan had arranged, Ms. Rodriguez, had a way of making even the hardest math problems make sense. she connected everything to real-world examples, using gear ratios to explain fractions, basketball statistics to teach percentages. The car pulled into the United Center's private lot, and Marcus felt the familiar flutter of excitement in his stomach. No matter how many times he came here, it never got old. Inside, the practice court was already set up. Cones marked out dribbling patterns on the polished wood, and a shooting machine was positioned under one of the hoops. But today, something was different. There was a folding chair placed at center court, with a familiar figure sitting in it. "Mr. Jordan," Marcus said, surprised. Usually Jordan only came on Fridays, when they worked on planning the youth program. "Marcus," Jordan stood, gesturing to the ball rack, "grab one and show me what you've been working on." For the next hour, Marcus demonstrated everything Coach Williams had been teaching him. The improved crossover, the quicker release on his jump shot, the defensive slides that were becoming second nature. Jordan watched silently, his expression unreadable. Finally, after Marcus sank his 20th free throw in a row, Jordan held up his hand. "Come here for a minute," he said, patting the folding chair next to his. "Let's talk." Marcus grabbed his water bottle and sat down, his heart racing from the workout. The squeak of his sneakers on the court echoed in the empty arena. "Your school tryouts are tomorrow," Jordan said. It wasn't a question. "Yes, sir." "Nervous?" Marcus considered lying, then remembered what his mother always said about honesty being stronger than pride. "A little, maybe more than a little." Jordan smiled. "Good. Nerves mean you care. But here's the thing. You've put in the work. 3 months of proper training, proper coaching. You're not the same player you were when we met." "I know, but..." Marcus hesitated. "Some of the guys at school, they've been playing together for years. They all went to basketball camp together last summer, and I'm just the kid who changed my tire in the rain," Jordan finished. "The kid who's been getting up at 5 a.m. to practice before school. The one who's been learning 2 trades at once, basketball and auto repair, while keeping his grades up." Put that way, it did sound impressive. But there was something else bothering Marcus, something he hadn't told anyone. "What if I make the team," he said slowly, "and they ask how I got so much better? I can't tell them about any of this. Sometimes I feel like I'm lying to my best friend." Jordan was quiet for a moment, spinning a basketball on his finger thoughtfully. "Integrity matters to you. That's good. But remember what we're building here. A program that's going to help hundreds of kids like yourself. Sometimes keeping a secret isn't about hiding something wrong. It's about protecting something right until it's ready." Marcus thought about that. Like when mechanics test a car before letting the customer drive it? Exactly. Or like when a player practices a new move until it's perfect before using it in a game. Jordan passed the ball to Marcus. "Speaking of which, show me that spin move one more time." Marcus stood up, dribbling the ball with renewed confidence. The move Coach Williams had taught him was becoming smoother each day. Start right, spin, left, protect the ball, explode toward the hoop. This time, though, Jordan stood up to defend. Marcus felt his heart jump. He was about to go one-on-one with Michael Jordan. Time seemed to slow down. Marcus remembered everything he'd learned over the past 3 months. He remembered Uncle James teaching him about patience, about feeling the right moment. He remembered his father teaching him to trust his instincts on the court. The move came naturally. Right, spin, protect, explode. Jordan was there to challenge the shot, but Marcus had learned to adjust in midair, just like Coach Williams had shown him. The ball kissed off the backboard and dropped through the net. Jordan's smile was all the approval Marcus needed. "That," Jordan said, is what you show them tomorrow. Let your game do the talking. Later that evening, as Mr. Richardson's car pulled up to Marcus's building, Jordan's words were still echoing in his mind. His mother was waiting by the window, just like always. Some things hadn't changed. "One more thing," Mr. Richardson said, as Marcus reached for the door handle. He handed over a small package wrapped in brown paper. "Mr. Jordan wanted you to have this for tomorrow." Inside was a brand new Bulls jersey. Not a replica, a real one, like the players wore. And on the back, where the name should be, it simply said, "Believe." Marcus ran his fingers over the letters. He thought about the past 3 months, the early mornings, the late evenings, the satisfaction of mastering a new skill, whether it was a jump shot or a timing belt replacement. Tomorrow would be his chance to show what he'd learned, even if he couldn't explain how he learned it. But that was okay. Some stories were meant to be held close, like his mother said. Looking up at his apartment window, Marcus saw his mom wave. She'd supported him through all of this, never doubting, never questioning whether it was too much. Just like she'd supported his father's dreams and Uncle James's teachings. As he climbed the stairs to their apartment, Marcus realized something important. Tomorrow's tryouts weren't just about making the team. They were about proving that kindness, like stopping to help someone with a flat tire, could lead to amazing things. The jersey in his hands was proof of that. The school gym was packed. Marcus had never seen it this full, not even during regular season games. It seemed like everyone wanted to watch the tryouts. Students, teachers, even some parents who'd left work early. In the locker room, Marcus carefully unfolded his Bulls practice jersey. He decided to wear it under his regular t-shirt. Some things were just for him to know about. "Yo, Marcus!" Dion's voice echoed off the metal lockers. "You ready for this?" Marcus turned to see his best friend already in his basketball shorts and jersey. Dion had been giving him space these past few months, never pushing too hard about where Marcus disappeared to after school or how his game had suddenly improved so much. "Ready as I'll ever be," Marcus replied, pulling his t-shirt over the hidden Bulls jersey. "Man, you've been different lately," Dion said, lowering his voice. "Good different, but you know you can tell me anything, right?" Marcus felt the familiar weight of his secret. "I know, D, and someday I will. I promise." Coach Martinez's whistle cut through the locker room chatter. "Let's go, gentlemen. Court in 2 minutes." As they filed out into the gym, Marcus scanned the crowded bleachers. His mother was there, still in her hospital scrubs. She'd come straight from work. Next to her was Mr. Washington from the garage, wiping his glasses with a clean shop rag. But what made Marcus's heart skip was who he saw sitting in the very back corner, wearing sunglasses and a plain black cap. Michael Jordan himself, with Mr. Richardson beside him. They hadn't said they were coming. "First drill," Coach Martinez called out. "Full court layup lines. Show me what you've got." The squeaking of sneakers filled the gym as 20 hopeful players began running the drill. Marcus fell into rhythm, easily, remembering Coach Williams's voice. Every movement has a purpose. Make it count. His first layup was perfect. So was his second. And his third. He could hear the murmurs from the crowd growing with each successful shot. "Thompson's got game," someone whispered. "Where'd he learn to move like that?" The drills got progressively harder. Defensive slides, 3-man weave, full court dribbling through cones. Marcus felt like he was floating, like everything he'd learned over the past 3 months was flowing through him naturally. Then came the scrimmage, the part everyone had been waiting for. 10 minutes to show everything you had. "Thompson, your team captain, Blue Squad," Coach Martinez announced. "Williams, your captain, White Squad." Marcus caught Dion's eye across the court. His friend was on the opposite team, and there was a glint of competitive fire in his expression. The game started fast. Marcus's first touch resulted in a perfect assist to his teammate for an easy basket. His second touch was a steal that he turned into a fast break layup. But it was the third play that made the gym explode. Dion had the ball at the top of the key, determined to score on his friend. Marcus crouched into his defensive stance, just like Coach Williams had taught him. Dion drove right, but Marcus knew his friend's tendencies. He'd always spin back left. The moment Dion started his spin, Marcus was ready. He poked the ball free, scooped it up, and headed down court. Two defenders converged on him. Time slowed down. Marcus heard Jordan's voice in his head. "Let your game do the talking." He crossed over to his right, spun left, the move they'd practiced yesterday, and split the defenders. The path to the basket opened up like a highway. Marcus planted his right foot and soared toward the rim. The slam dunk shook the backboard and sent the crowd into a frenzy. Even Coach Martinez's jaw dropped. In the chaos that followed, only Marcus noticed Jordan and Mr. Richardson quietly slipping out of the gym. But just before they left, Jordan tipped his cap ever so slightly. The rest of the scrimmage was a blur. When Coach Martinez's whistle finally signaled the end, Marcus was drenched in sweat, but grinning from ear to ear. He'd done it. Really done it. "Thompson!" Coach Martinez called out. "My office, please." In the small office beside the gym, Coach sat behind his desk, looking at Marcus with an expression the boy couldn't read. "That was quite a show out there," he said finally. "Want to tell me how a kid who could barely make a layup 3 months ago is suddenly playing like that?" Marcus took a deep breath. "I've been practicing, Coach. A lot." "Practicing?" The coach leaned forward. "Or getting help?" Marcus felt his heart stop. Did he know about Jordan? "Because," Coach Martinez continued, "I've been coaching here for 20 years, and I've never seen anyone improve that much without help." He paused, then smiled. "Which is exactly what this team needs. Someone who understands the value of getting better, of accepting guidance." Relief flooded through Marcus. "So, I made the team?" "Made the team?" Coach Martinez laughed. "Son, you're my starting point guard." Later, as Marcus walked out of the gym with his mother and Mr. Washington, Dion caught up to them. "Yo, that was insane!" his friend exclaimed. "For real, though. You gotta tell me how you got so good." Marcus looked at his mother, who nodded slightly. "Maybe it was time." "Actually," Marcus said, "it's kind of a crazy story. It started 3 months ago, during that big storm." "Hold up," Dion interrupted, pointing across the parking lot. "Is that? No way!" A sleek black car was pulled over at the curb, its right rear tire completely flat, and standing beside it, looking at his phone with an amused expression, was Michael Jordan. Marcus smiled. "Some stories really do come full circle." "Come on," he said to Dion. "Let me show you how to change a tire. I learned from the best." As they walked toward the car, Marcus realized that the real game changer hadn't been the basketball training, or even meeting Michael Jordan. It had been that first choice, the choice to help someone in need, without knowing where it might lead. And somewhere, he was sure, Uncle James was smiling again. And that's how a flat tire on a rainy Chicago evening changed not just one life, but many. Sometimes the smallest acts of kindness can create the biggest ripples. I'd love to know where you're listening from. Drop your city in the comments below, and let me know if you've ever had a chance encounter that changed your life. If you enjoyed Marcus and Michael Jordan's story, Don't forget to like and subscribe, and check out another inspiring story appearing on your screen right now. Until next time, remember, you never know when a simple act of kindness might change everything.